Norelle, as you're holding your little baby, Lily, and, Dr. Cooper had so much to do with your ability to just have the baby. I'd love to just hear what your thoughts are.
I don't understand, and it makes me kind of mad and very confused why doctors that help women get pregnant, fertility clinics and everything, don't utilize the same lab workup that she does to help make sure that all the boxes are checked so that you can get pregnant. Because I didn't spend as much as most people do because I found somewhere that was much cheaper than the national average. But some people spend $24,000 and they don't have the lab workup that Dr. Cooper does. And so they're not sure why you're not getting pregnant, or if it's the best time to try a cycle. And that's $24,000 gone.
Wow.
Trying. And it's an emotional roller coaster.
This is Fat Science, a podcast dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice.
I'm Dr. Emily Cooper. I've been treating patients with metabolic issues for over 25 years. I'm on a mission to raise awareness about metabolic dysfunction and why diets don't work.
Hi, I'm Andrea Taylor. I've been fat, very fat, chubby, morbidly obese, and done almost every diet ever invented. They all worked until they didn't. I've known Dr. Cooper forever, but when I became her patient and we learned metabolism was the real problem, wow, everything changed, and I've never been healthier.
And I'm Mark Wright. It's time for Fat Science.
Wait, does this podcast make me look fat?
Welcome to Fat Science. I'm Mark Wright, along with Andrea Taylor and Dr. Emily Cooper. And we have a special guest today, Norelle, who is joining us from Kansas. And I wish that all of you at home could see what we're seeing. Norelle is on screen with her 9-week-old baby, Lily, who is just adorable. Norelle, it's so great to have you here. You're a patient of Dr. Cooper's, and this episode is going to be so much fun to learn your story and your journey.
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
We could probably spend an hour talking about your baby, but let's start at the beginning, Norelle. Norelle, I'd love to know the story of how you met Dr. Cooper. Was it that you had fertility issues and you sought out medical help for that and then got to see Dr. Cooper? How did all that start?
I had weight loss issues. I gained weight very easily. And I tried many different doctors to help me figure out what was going on. And I finally found a doctor when we lived in Washington that used some of the medications that Dr. Cooper uses, but still put me on a very low carb diet. And at that time, we weren't really trying for kids, but I hadn't been on birth control for maybe 5 years. And I had never had like an oops or anything like that. So it was a little bit of both. And I had a fertility workup, and they did the contrast through the fallopian tubes. They did whatever little bit of labs they do draw. And they just came back and they were like, everything looks fine. We don't know why you're not getting pregnant. We're going to diagnose you as unexplained infertility.
And how did that make you feel? That's kind of a strange diagnosis, right?
Yeah. Here's your diagnosis. We don't know how to help you. We don't know why. Yeah. And that's, pretty much sums up my whole weight loss struggle too. Like nobody could ever figure out anything or help me with anything. Medical doctors would just tell me and look at me, eat less, work out more.
Wow.
But couldn't be further from what was happening because I was doing CrossFit, running,
Which is
swim
intense,
workouts. Yeah. And I was at like 1,200 calories a day.
And still
Dr.
gaining weight.
Cooper's like, that's so horrible.
I know. It's so true. Oh.
Norelle, did you have a history of dieting if you go back to, say, your teenage years?
I did, yeah. Probably much younger than that. I remember my mom always, she wasn't overweight, but she just was conscious about it. And We would try, like the grapefruit diet and just all sorts of weird things. The next thing you saw in the magazine. And then I think around 10 is when it really started being something that was really big in my mind. And I remember even asking my parents for Christmas for a thigh master.
Oh.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Andrea, I'd love to know what your thoughts are.
Oh, I had the thigh master. I was older than you. I'm older than you, so I got it at an older age. But oh yeah, I did the grapefruit diet. That was I actually liked the grapefruit diet for like a couple of like maybe for a
Right.
month. But it was I did every single one of those like you did, and they all as Dr. Cooper says, they all work until they
Yeah.
don't. And but the thing is, all the times when you went to all the doctors, the thing that's the overarching thing is they all make you feel it's your fault that they're not working. And that's the thing that until it took me a lot longer than you, but you don't realize until it's almost not too late, but you don't realize that that is like the worst feeling ever, that they make you feel like it's your fault. It's not a medical problem. It's like, well, we can give you all these things to do, but obviously you're not doing them properly because if you
Yeah.
were, you would be thin and your life would be better and the world would be kittens and
Mm.
puppies.
That's
Norelle, what
that's the
was that
truth.
like as a kid? I mean, it's hard enough being just a kid, but when you're struggling with your weight and your body image as a kid, what was that like for you emotionally back then?
As I look back, I remember getting picked on in school, coming home from school crying. But as I look back at pictures, I wasn't like horribly overweight as there are kids now that I see. But I guess it was just not as widespread then when I was younger. So I got honed in on and picked on. And yeah, as puberty hit and thing, it's very emotionally, and I still struggle with it. Thinking and wondering what people are thinking when they look at me, you
Hmm.
know?
So, how did you meet Dr. Cooper? It's a really interesting story.
It is. At the time, we were living in Washington State, and I finally found a different doctor that I guess said she specialized in medical weight loss, or I'm not sure how she phrased it, but she does use some medications that Dr. Cooper uses, but not all of them. So she wasn't like fixing, I guess, the underlying cause, maybe just the medicines that help you lose 10 or 15 pounds. And she still had me on very low carb diet. I think 10, maybe 20 grams a day. But I was moving and I was going to not be her patient anymore. And I was very scared that I was not going to get where I wanted, or I was going to lose what little progress. And I mean, little. I had maybe lost 10 or 15 pounds under her care. But we were moving and I was worried, how am I going to continue to be your patient? What's going to happen with me? And so she was like, well, I can't continue to see you, but here, read this book from a colleague of mine. Um, and I remember asking Dr. Cooper, and she says she has no knowledge of this. So I think colleague was just a term she used because they're both doctors.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's all
But
right.
yeah, she's like, I don't know this doctor. um, and
So you
so I
read the
read the
Metabolic
book,
Storm?
The
Yeah.
Metabolic Storm. Yeah, and I remember reading it and just highlighting everything, and when a patient testimonial, I was like, "This is my life."
Hmm.
Yeah. So, how did you end up then, Dr. Cooper? I'll let you pick it up from here. When Norelle first started seeing you, what did you see? I mean, it seems like so much of what she's talking about is what we all have experienced in our lives and your patients.
Yes.
But what was it like in the beginning for you as her physician?
Well, I think just taking in the history and hearing a lot about the struggles from an early age with weight elevation and then attempts to lose weight and exercise without enough fuel. And then more recently, the low carb dieting and the questions about fertility. It all kind of pointed to metabolic dysfunction of some type. And then you wonder, well, how much of that was an original problem and how much of that was aggravated by, all the different diets and attempts to lose weight. And so you can't really separate out those two things. You kind of just have to look at the metabolism as a whole and where are we now and kind of meet it where it is. And so we started out just at that point, I think Norelle already you had started to reintroduce carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates into the diet after having been on this low carb. Then you read the book and you're like, oh, I better add those back. So you'd started that process. And then we just encouraged to continue to normalize the nutritional intake to fuel the body and to definitely not be in an underfueled state associated with exercise and everything else. And then pretty quickly, based on our initial workup, we saw the what we call like the imprint of the history of diets and deprivation and stuff in the lab work, because we saw very high levels of famine signals, which are one of the classic ones is ghrelin, which is from the stomach, that is nicknamed the hunger hormone. And that was like off the charts high. And that also triggers another famine signal that's produced by the hypothalamus in the brain called neuropeptide Y. And that was also really high. So these levels were very high. And at the same time, some of the signals that our body produces that are kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum, that are security signals, those were very suppressed. But another thing we saw was an abnormal insulin spike after eating that promotes hypoglycemia, which is like a low blood sugar type of problem. So,
Hmm.
so all of this feeds into kind of a vicious cycle. And it's all related to just a general weakness in the metabolic pathway that's brought on by probably some kind of original issues, possibly, but maybe not. Maybe maybe there wasn't anything wrong. And it was just that at 10 years old, when girls go through that growth spurt, they do put on weight and it's normal sometimes, but there can be body image issues and there can be, that teasing, and then that can lead to trying to do some dietary control, efforts. And then that can lead to a slowing of metabolism and disruption of the whole metabolism. And it can be kind of like our prom dress example, where you try to lose a certain small amount of weight and then you gain that back and then you gain more and then you try to lose again. And same thing, a cycle throughout your life. So it's hard to tell, what was what. But we did see the impact of those famine signals on the reproductive hormone signals as well. So it was kind of putting the brakes on the reproductive system as well to try to slow down the possibility of pregnancy and ovulation.
Wow. So, Norelle, were you not ovulating, or was it just? I'm confused about exactly what was preventing the pregnancy in the first place.
Um, I probably wasn't ovulating then, but I think
Mhm.
the way Dr. Cooper's always explained it to me is that the hormones that I needed to have my body accept a pregnancy, because my body saw that I was starving. So she always
Mhm.
would tell me, why would it take on another life?
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. So, Dr. Cooper, in terms that an average person like me could understand, what was preventing her from getting pregnant?
Well, with pregnancy, there's signals that have to come from your brain to tell your ovaries to produce estrogen and ovulate, to keep up a normal cycle. And then beyond that, there's also signals once you become pregnant that would affect the ability of the pregnancy to take place, like
Hmm.
implantation success for implantation and carrying a pregnancy in the early stages. And so a lot of those signals can be disrupted by these famine signals. So if the famine signals are elevated, such as the ghrelin and that neuropeptide Y, and if the security signals, such as leptin that we've talked about, glucose, if those are kind of weak, then the body's kind of perceiving that there's some type of famine and you should not be ovulating. So the brain does not send those ovulation signals to the ovaries, and it kind of shuts it down there. And so that's what we were seeing at first. And but it did resolve pretty nicely, actually, after a long time of just eating more normally, not doing CrossFit without fueling it, and with appropriate management of the metabolic condition, such as the insulin spikes and stuff like that. And so then we did see the restoration of the signaling from the brain to the ovaries, and the ovaries responding, putting out a lot of estrogen. And so you can go from what are called anovulatory cycles, where you're really not ovulating. Maybe once in a while you are, but it's not really steady, to more of a normal, stable cycle. And so I think that's what we were aiming for.
So when you were seeing Dr. Cooper, what were the differences? What were the changes in your body? And also, what were the changes that you were thinking about? Like, what were your mental changes?
Well, just I remember listening to you and you saying how much of a weight was lifted off. I remember my first appointment with her, and she did her whole lab workup, and she figured out and pieced together all the things that weren't communicating right, that were cross communication. And she basically was like, "It's not your fault." And
It's
yeah,
amazing that
I
feeling.
cried. I was like, "But everybody told me it's always my fault."
Mm.
Um, so
Right.
it was that was a huge weight lifted off. And the yeah,
Literally.
yeah, and the switch to eating normal did take quite a bit of time mentally, because you're told all the time, no carbs, no carbs. I mean, she still looks at my labs and says, "Oh, you probably should have had, another slice of toast or
Yep.
something." So I'm like, "Oh, I need that," like, still in my mind, because everybody still all around you is low carb, no carb. And so to be eating it when nobody else, like everybody else, thinks it's a horrible thing to have in your life, it's really hard mentally, to change those gears. It did take a while, because our main focus wasn't weight loss at the time. It was to get my body healthy enough for natural pregnancy. um, so it did take that first round a while to get weight to come down. And she also did give me a really good analogy that helped my emotional and mental state while waiting for it to go, is that she said it's like stopping a freight train and then getting it to go the other direction. So that really helped, because it's hard when you're doing something that somebody finally said isn't your fault, and you're trying to get the weight to come down, but it's not going like you would like it, or as fast as you would like it. But it took 3 years for 60 pounds to come off, the first time.
Right.
But our main goal was to get pregnant, and I got pregnant naturally 3 times. So that our goal worked.
Yes.
Right.
Wow. That's such a great story, Norelle. So the time frame from when you first started seeing Dr. Cooper to the birth of a child, what was that time span?
I started seeing her in 2016, and I had my son in 2021. So
So a
yeah,
5 year. Yeah. I
yeah.
think that freight train analogy is so great, because it really does take time for this stuff to reverse. Norelle, I'd love to ask, you just have this glow about you. You look so happy, and to see your little baby Lily is just, melts our hearts. Um, Life is pretty good now, isn't it, for you?
It is, yes. I'm not on any of my medication right now because I'm breastfeeding.
Hmm.
But just with my son, we'll probably go to the 6 month mark, um, and then I'll get back on everything. But I certainly feel a lot better this pregnancy than I did my first pregnancy, because I gained an enormous amount of weight. But this time I didn't. Thankfully, I gained only less than half. So it's a lot better this go round, and I feel a lot better. I think things in my body, like she said, got fixed with pregnancy. So that's good to know also.
Yeah. Dr. Cooper, when you see a patient like Norelle who's had such success, and I mean, it's literally life changing, isn't it?
It
I
really
mean, what
is.
what goes through your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I just love it. I think it's so important to. There's only a certain window of time when you can really start a family, and so it's really important to take it seriously and try to get to the root issue and do what we can. But it's true, pregnancy is an interesting thing because it does, in some people, pregnancy can actually improve certain metabolic function. It depends on what the dysfunction is, but you can sometimes see improvement, especially with like hypoglycemia, low blood sugar patients. We see that the exposure to the high amounts of oxytocin during pregnancy can sometimes really improve the overall tendency to hypoglycemia, at least for a short term. And so that's also interesting, seeing kind of the pre and post pregnancy metabolism changes that can occur. But it is frustrating to have to stop your medication because of pregnancy when your body's not really ready to try to do it by itself without the medication. It's not being, uh, given the opportunity to taper it based on how strong your metabolic system is really functioning. You just have to stop it abruptly because it's safer, during pregnancy. So that's kind of what Norelle experienced with that first pregnancy. It was
Yeah.
kind of like, whoa.
And what's the reason, Dr. Cooper, that you have to stop the metabolic meds during
Well,
pregnancy?
so many medications are just not studied in pregnancy, when it comes to their potential effect on the developing
Yeah.
fetus. And so it's safer to just go off of them. The indication is if it's not life threatening, probably should not expose the unborn child to a lot of different medications. And so those would be stopped. Whereas if we're not dealing with pregnancy, we do it much more methodically based on how the body's performing, based on objective testing and much more incrementally and slowly. And so, but this was a choice. You just kind of cross your fingers that the metabolism is strong enough to kind of make it through without getting too far off balance. And Norelle, your pregnancy was like one of the most off balance ones that I've actually
It was
seen.
the first one, definitely.
The first one it was like, it really, we weren't expecting it to be, that much
Yeah.
affected,
I
but
spent 3 years getting 60 pounds off and 9 months gaining 92 pounds.
yeah.
So that was
Right. And some of
that
that's
was a lot.
totally normal, in pregnancy, but that's more than what's considered normal in pregnancy. And you were, really worried about that. But then your body, like, did really fall into line after that, pretty
Yeah.
much.
A lot of
Hmm.
things got fixed after having my first son. I remember getting back
Hmm.
on the meds, and I
Yeah.
needed half of the dose that I used to take. We had to
Yes.
do like a micro dose of one of
Yes.
them.
Right.
Yeah. But I
Hmm.
can't get pregnant that many times to fix all the
No.
things that are wrong with my metabolic system. I'm done. Two and done.
Pregnancy is not a pregnancy is
No,
not a
it's
drug.
not. Well, and for some people, it's the opposite. I mean, you'll talk to some people that they were fine until they became pregnant, and then they developed like big weight issues after pregnancy. And so, not everyone's the same and has the same response. But yeah,
Well, isn't that part of the thing with metabolic dysfunction is that every single person is totally different. So you can't treat, it's not a blanket treatment. It's every single person is totally, totally
everybody's
different.
different. It's so true.
Norelle, I know that there are people listening to us right now who are struggling, women who are struggling to get pregnant, who are struggling because of the metabolic roller coaster they've been on, maybe since dieting, as a young person. I'd love for you to just speak to that person listening and just give them some thoughts, some encouragement to whatever's on your mind right now.
Find a doctor like Dr. Cooper, although there's not many. I know that she is training some people that work under her. Um, I don't know if she has like guidelines that she could give to people that they could maybe then take to their primary care doctor. But even I've taken things from her to my primary care, and they have no idea what I'm asking. Um,
Hmm.
so I would just say that there is somebody that can help. She is an amazing doctor,
Oh.
and hopefully she can get her message out so that all the other doctors will get on board.
I think it comes down to just, hoping to find doctors that are curious about things, because as long as they're asking, well, why is this happening? You have to trust that they have the background and enough knowledge to find answers, if they have that curiosity to look for the possible reasons. And so I think that's the model that we hope to find, instead of let's just force your body to become pregnant by throwing you on all these meds and all this treatment, and then the chances are still really low that you'll become pregnant. And if you were to, you may feel terrible. Your baby may be, it just may not go so smoothly. So, better than that would be, do we have time to just look deeper into what could be the cause? And it's not hard to find. I mean, any knowledge that I have, it just comes from reading journal articles and textbooks. It's really, it is all information that's very accessible, but it's just not customarily incorporated into medical training. And so I think having that doctor that has a passion and curiosity, they will be able to kind of look deeper into things and maybe find additional reasons and ways to approach it. But you're right. I mean, we started this training program to try to help make it easier for providers that are looking for those answers.
The passion and the curiosity is a very big thing that you think is very easy to talk about, but I don't think it's very easy when you talk to a lot of
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
different doctors. And I think that you think it's, oh, it's so out there because you're obsessed and um, you read all the time. But I think that one of the key things is when you bring up the words metabolic dysfunction, I think that that is like a key thing that you can bring up to a lot of different doctors, and it sets off a light bulb in a lot of their um, in a lot of what they'll look for in your treatment. Sometimes that can set a doctor off into a different path, maybe that they weren't looking for, as to the blame game, as to like maybe it's not just you, it's something else that's medical.
Yeah.
Andrea probably feels the same way I do with all the different doctors that she's had to see, that it's hard to find somebody that is really passionate or curious or has the time to be curious, um,
Right.
because they just do what they do and that's it. That's their baseline.
Well, I think the
Yeah.
other aspect is a doctor who trusts the patient and what they're saying and believes them, because that's the writing was on the wall. I mean, you had all the evidence. You were doing all this CrossFit. You were on these diets and your weight didn't respond to that. So that tells you right off the bat that there's something wrong, and then you didn't become pregnant even though you weren't using birth control at the same time. So it's big clues were really there. But I get that it is really hard, and the medical system is becoming even a little bit more difficult to navigate with like shorter appointments and um, more interference with red tape for
Mm.
providers. So, but I think this is what makes it's so rewarding. You asked me how I feel about it. I feel like it's why we do this. It's so rewarding to see this kind of thing happen, to see families built and to see
Hmm.
people reducing their disease risks and things. But unfortunately, I think that they've done studies that show that doctors don't really believe that they can make a difference like that. That's part of the problem, is they lack the belief in it. And so that's kind of sad too.
Yeah.
But
Well, they lack
What
the
I think.
belief in their patients as well. That
that's
you're the
true.
first doctor, and still I see other doctors, primary care for other things, OBGYN for the pregnancies I've had, and discussing with them my metabolic issues. I know that I have because I have a doctor that has found it, but they still don't believe that it's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So they still don't trust me as a patient.
Yeah, and that's what I think is so sad about the medical establishment right now. 10 years ago, my family doc looked at the results that I was getting from Dr. Cooper and said, "I have no idea what she's doing." And
This,
and
I just
but
took
to
mine to an OBGYN and she said, I don't even know what half of these are.
yeah, and but to my doctor's credit, he said, "If it's working, please continue to see her." And what I think is interesting
Right.
is Dr. Cooper's been doing this for more than 20 years. And we still have doctors who are looking at these lab results saying, "I have no idea what they're talking about." And then they're blaming you and putting you on a low carb diet. And I'm just thinking, wake up.
Mm-hmm.
They need to just wake up to the reality that, I mean, we just talked about this before we hit the record button, Dr. Cooper. How many people are diabetic or pre diabetic right now in our country? What's the percentage?
Yeah, if you combine the two, it's over half of the adults in our
So,
country.
so everybody you see today, go out in the world, half of those people are on that train going in the wrong direction,
Mm-hmm.
headed for a catastrophic illness at some point down the road. And we've got a solution. And I just, when I look at you, Norelle, and I think that, just imagine your life 10 and 20 years from now when your kids grow up and they get married. That's that's
Yeah.
that's what this is all about.
Hopefully there'll be more Dr. Coopers out there by that time.
Well, and you won't have your kids go on diets, so that'll help
No,
stop the cycle that goes from generation to generation of like often dieters. So
Yeah.
that'll help
And
too.
I'm just blown away, Norelle, at your tenacity. I mean, you're in another state, and you're like, I've got to see Dr. Cooper, and
I will
you
never
have.
stop seeing her.
Oh. Oh.
I wouldn't be able to live without her.
Yeah,
That's not
I
true.
think we all feel the same way.
Well,
Andrea, any final thoughts
Yeah.
as we wrap this up?
I would say that it really is a difficult thing. And, the difficult thing about trying, like when we say, oh, you have to find a doctor who will help you, it's really hard because for a lot of us, when we go to the doctor, um, we put a lot of faith and power in our doctors, and it's hard to talk back to them. Um, we think that they're really all knowledgeable and all powerful and that they know so much more than we do. Because, I mean, they went to a lot of school. They paid a lot of money. They went to all this fancy school. They went to big, huge residency
mhm,
programs and all this stuff. So when they say, oh, it's your fault and you didn't do all this and you didn't do all that, it really like we always feel like they have the power and we don't. And once you feel like, you know what, I do have some power and I do know things that they don't know. It it changes the dynamic a little bit. And I'm not saying you have to become like Dr. Google and obsess, over like some website that tells you stuff, but I do think you have to understand sometimes when it comes to some of this metabolic syndrome stuff that you do sometimes know a little bit that you have to question um, and help yourself a little
Yeah,
bit.
Norelle, any final thoughts that you'd like to offer as we wrap things up?
Just backing off Andrea, it's hard to advocate for yourself when you've been told something is a certain way by multiple doctors. But yeah, once you have that empowerment and you find out the underlying cause, I mean, it's still hard to find somebody that will listen or understand, but at least you know that there is somebody out there that can help.
Right. You said it took you 8 years. I mean, that was a long, long struggle. And before the 8 years, it took you a long time to get to that 8 years.
Yeah.
So it really, it's longer than that. It, I feel what you
oh.
felt.
Dr. Cooper, anything as we wrap it up?
Ah, I I wish we could change the world with a snap of our fingers and in like
Well, one
it's
There
person
you
true.
at a
go.
time.
That's true. There's a lot of power in that.
Well, Dr. Cooper, Andrea Taylor, Norelle, it's been so great having you on the show, and all our best to you, Norelle, as your little family grows. And what an inspirational story you have. I love it.
Thank you so
I love
much
it.
for letting me share it.
Thanks, Norelle. Thanks so much.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And this has been another edition of Fat Science.
No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.
I'm Mark Wright. Thanks for listening to Fat Science with Dr. Emily Cooper, a Work P2P production. New episodes drop every Monday. If you've enjoyed the conversation, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. This production is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice. Join us next week for another episode dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.